Hey guys, today's video lecture topic are going to be the biological macromolecules. Please make sure you're filling in your notes organizer as I go through the video lecture. Keep in mind this organizer is a little bit different than what you normally do, so really you're responsible for your own notes. Take as many notes as you can. The better notes you take, the better they will serve you in the future. So I'm actually recording this during my lunch period, so as I talk about these biological macromolecules, I'm going to be showing you how they apply to what I'm eating for lunch today. Okay, so there's your definition. That goes in the box in the middle. Macromolecules are large molecules that are formed by joining smaller organic molecules together. So they are small subunits put together to form these very large molecules. So that's what macro means. Macro means large. So macromolecules are also known as polymers. So that goes in the middle box there. Poly means many, so we're talking about many things being put together. And what are those many things that we are putting together? We're putting together the monomers. So monomers come together to form polymers. Monomers are the building blocks or repeating subunits that make up the macromolecules, the polymers. So monomers are the building blocks of polymers. And that's important because for each macromolecule that we talk about, I'm going to tell you what the building blocks are, what the monomers are. So make sure you fill those in. All biological macromolecules are organic molecules, which means they contain the element carbon. Every organic molecule contains the element carbon. So all these molecules that we're going to be talking about today that are so incredibly important to living things all center around having the element carbon. So there are 4 biological macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Today's going to be a little bit of an introduction to each of these biological macromolecules. So we're going to start by talking about carbohydrates. Now, when you think of carbohydrates, you probably think of the type of foods that contain carbohydrates. So in the case of my lunch, I actually have some pita bread that are full of carbohydrates. Okay, so the monomers or building blocks of this particular polymer or macromolecule are going to be monosaccharides or simple sugars. Okay, mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So we're talking about one single sugar. So we have these sugar subunits that are put together to form the big carbohydrate macromolecules. So when you hear carbohydrates, you should think of sugars and fibers. Okay, the basic unit are going to be the simple sugars. So I've got the monosaccharides filled in for you. Here is your function of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are your main source of energy. Simple sugars provide you with fast-acting energy, while complex sugars or starches provide you with long-lasting energy. So think about if you were exercising. If you were exercising and you needed some sort of energy fast, you would eat something like an apple, because apple is full of those simple sugars, right? They're going to give you a quick boost of energy very, very quickly. If you were preparing for a marathon that you were running tomorrow, you would make sure that you carbo-loaded the night before, right? Those are going to be full of complex starches, complex sugars. They're going to provide you with longer lasting energy. There's an episode of The Office where Michael Scott is about to run like a 5K or something like that, and he's like, got a carbo load, and so he's shoveling Alfredo fettuccine into his mouth right before the race. And of course, that's not going to give him energy by the time he's done with the race, because that provides you with long-lasting energy. So instead, he just pukes it all up at the end of the race, and it doesn't help him whatsoever. Okay, additional functions of carbohydrates: they're going to give structure and support to the cells and therefore the organism. So I'm also eating some celery in my lunch today, and that is full of a carbohydrate called cellulose. And it's basically like the fiber that makes the cells very sturdy and makes the celery very thick, and so that it's, crunchy. So again, here's some carbohydrate examples: grains, pastas, fruits, vegetables, sugar, honey, potatoes. Those are all full of carbohydrates. And then cellulose, like in my celery here, okay, that's going to be what makes up the cell wall of plant cells, so that's also full of carbohydrates. So things that you might want to write down under additional info. Carbohydrates consist of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ratio of 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms for every carbon. So you can write down this little formula right here, because that's what that's saying. So for every carbon, you're going to have 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And so depending on what carbohydrate you're talking about, you might have 50 of these, or you might have 300 of these. When you have two simple sugars joined together, two monosaccharides joined together, it's called a disaccharide. Di means two, saccharide means sugar. So sucrose, for example, is a disaccharide. It's a very simple two sugar. Okay, two little sugar subunits put together. Lactose is another example of a disaccharide. Now, if you have lots of those simple sugars joined together, you call that a polysaccharide, because remember, poly means many, so you have many monosaccharides joined together. So starches, like you find in pasta and potatoes, glycogen, cellulose, all of those are going to be examples of polysaccharides. Okay, that leaves us with done with carbohydrates. Now we're going to be moving on to lipids. And some of my lipids today are going to be found in my peanut butter. Okay, when you hear lipids, you should think of fats. And good for peanut butter, these are very healthy fats. Okay, so fats, oils, and waxes. When you hear lipids, you should think of the word fats. Fats, oils, and waxes. Now, lipids are sort of an exception to the rule because they don't have a true building block. They don't have a true monomer. They're essentially composed of fatty acids, glycerol, and then various other components. But you can see here, when you think of lipids, you think of fats. So I've got my picture of Paula Deen, right? That's what got her in trouble. She was using fats too much in her recipes. She loves her butter. She loves her oils. And that probably led to her getting diabetes. Okay, so what is the function of lipids? Lipids' primary function is to store energy. So remember, carbohydrates gave you your main source of energy. Now we're talking more like energy storage. So you also have various other functions like insulation. So a walrus, for example, has a ton of blubber. That blubber is full of lipids, fats, and that's going to keep him, nice and warm despite the fact that he lives in a very cold climate. Lipids also prevent water loss because they don't mix with water. We've probably all done this simple experiment before back in kindergarten where you mix, water and oil, and you see that the oil floats because it's less dense and they don't mix together. So that's a useful function for lipids. It's part of the cell membrane. It forms that waxy cuticle on plant leaves, right? So the water and snow will just slide off, go down to the roots. Honeycomb and a beehive are all full of lipids, and that ability to prevent water loss is very beneficial to living things. So here's some of your examples. Butter, oils, olive, vegetable, peanut oil, avocados, wax, plant cuticles. Steroids are an example of lipids. Cholesterol, that's an example of a steroid. Okay, and then some additional information. You definitely want to write down this term, hydrophobic. Lipids are hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water, phobic meaning fearing. So lipids are hydrophobic. They're water-fearing, which essentially means they do not mix with water. When a lipid is a solid at room temperature, you call it a triglyceride. When a lipid is a liquid at room temperature, you call it an oil. Okay, so think about all your oils that you know of. They are all liquid at room temperature. Okay, if it's solid at room temperature, you call it a triglyceride. And that waxy cuticle here is why those little water droplets form, because they are hydrophobic, the waxy cuticle is. Okay, some more additional info. Lipids that have only single bonds are called saturated fats. They are saturated with single bonds. Lipids with at least one double bond is called an unsaturated fat. And lipids that have many double bonds are going to be polyunsaturated fats. Remember, poly means many. So you want to be careful with how many saturated fats that you are eating. You have to eat fat sometime, right? You don't want to cut lipids completely out of your diet, but you want to be careful with how many saturated versus unsaturated fats that you're eating, and we'll talk about that more in class when we're looking at our food labels. Okay, so our next macromolecule are proteins, and I make sure I get lots of proteins every day. So in the case of my lunch, I have some hummus, which is full of protein, and then I also have some tuna that has lots of protein in it. Okay, so the building blocks of proteins, the monomers of proteins, are amino acids. You join amino acids together to form proteins. There are 20 different types of amino acids. Our body can make 10 of those 20 amino acids. So if our body is capable of producing only 10 of the 20 amino acids that we need, where do you think we get the other 10 from? We get the other 10 from our food, okay? These are called essential amino acids. This is why it's so incredibly important to eat your proteins, because you have to get those amino acids that your body can't make. You have to get them through your food. So vegetarians who aren't eating meats have to be very careful in what they're eating to make sure that they're getting those 10 essential amino acids from their foods. Things like hummus and nuts are going to give them the proteins that they need. Okay, so proteins have a million different functions. They are involved in nearly every process that is happening inside of your body. They are used for structural support. They're used for building muscle. This is why people who are into, muscle building are drinking protein shakes all the time. They're used for communicating signals between cells. They're used for speeding up reactions. Remember, I told you enzymes are special proteins. Okay, so enzymes are a type of protein. And they also control cell growth. So lots of different functions there. And some examples of foods that have proteins are going to be, your meats, your eggs, your nuts, your beans, your fish, your cheese, your milk. And then inside of your body, you have hemoglobin. That's a protein within your blood that's used for making sure you get oxygen everywhere you need in your body. And then insulin is an example of a protein. And you know that if people have issues with that protein in their body, that can lead to things like diabetes. Okay, some additional information on proteins. The structure of a protein is what determines its function. We talked about that with enzymes. If you change the shape, you change the function. So make sure you have that under your additional info for proteins. Proteins are made up of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and sometimes sulfur. Proteins make up about 15% of your body mass because your hair, your skin, and your nails are all made of proteins. Amino acids are held together by peptide bonds in order to form proteins, and proteins are made by the ribosome. Make sure you have that written down. The ribosome is the organelle responsible for producing proteins. And that leaves us with our final biological macromolecule, nucleic acids, my absolute favorite. And all of my foods, okay, my spinach, my grapes, my bread, my celery, my hummus, my peanut butter, everything that I eat has nucleic acids because nucleic acids are genetic information, which every living thing has genetic information. So all of these things, at some point during their processing system had DNA in it. Okay, so nucleic acids are made up of smaller monomers or subunits called nucleotides. A nucleotide consists of three things: a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. And we'll talk a lot more about this when we talk about DNA in our genetics unit. But a nucleotide is a subunit, so you put together nucleotides to form DNA and RNA, your nucleic acids. A sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. You will probably want to write that down under building blocks. When you write nucleotides, clarify that that is a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. And those nitrogen bases are A, C, G, or T, or U. You probably remember that from 7th grade. Okay? So the function of nucleic acids is to store and transmit genetic information. This is what carries your genes, right? This is what your parents pass down to you. This is why you look the way that you do, all because of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what DNA stands for. So here are examples of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. The major difference is going to be that DNA is double-stranded while RNA is single-stranded. And you have the nitrogen base thymine in DNA, whereas you have the nitrogen base uracil in RNA. And again, we'll get more into that in our genetics unit. Okay, so some additional information for nucleic acids. They're composed of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and hydrogen. And like I said, DNA is double-stranded, which means it's bigger. And because it's bigger, it's stuck inside the nucleus. It cannot travel outside the nucleus. So DNA is only found in the nucleus. RNA, because it's single-stranded, is actually physically smaller and can fit through the pores or the holes in the nuclear membrane. So it can actually travel anywhere in the cell, inside, in and out of the nucleus, which is good for when it's being used to make proteins. And that ends our information on the biological macromolecules. If there was any information that you missed, please make sure that you go back, you rewind, you pause, you rewatch, whatever you need to do to make sure you have this entire page filled out so that you can use it on our Check for Understanding. Hope you're having a great day.